because I tend to do that. We doing? Okay, we're live. Oh, actually, it would be helpful if I have this off. There we go. Okay, there we go. Now it's better. So welcome to today's mentorship meeting. This one's going to be a little bit different than the other ones, where we're going to be talking about specifically experiences in graduate school from other graduate students across the disciplines. We did our best to try to find graduate students that closely match the disciplines of the undergraduate mentees, so that y'all would have a better experience rather than just inviting like generalized disciplines. So we tried to look for each subdiscipline and get them on board to talk to us. So graduate programs are fundamentally different from undergraduate ones. And that's true. However, within each graduate program themselves, based on discipline and even subdiscipline, you're going to find that there's some variation between like department or your lab group in some cases. So like I mentioned before the recording, we're going to sort of refresh your memories on sort of the different aspects of graduate school. So some of the common ones that you'll find across most of the programs is you are going to have to take classes. Some of them are going to be review-based courses, where this is the department's way of sort of offering you the chance to review undergraduate courses that you have taken, topics, but at a higher level, and sort of review for them for a qualifier that you may have at the end of the course, or a written qualifier that's comprehensive of all the material you've learned across multiple courses. There will be some teaching. There are some rare circumstances where some graduate students have gone through their entire PhD without having to teach, which is interesting, but it happens. However, you're likely to be assigned a lab that's undergraduate, a recitation, or be grading for a class. Sometimes you'll even be grading for a graduate course class. I know in my department specifically, there are some senior level graduate students who TA for one of the more introductory graduate courses in my program. So something to consider. And of course, research. That's what makes a graduate program unique, is that you have research projects, and these will depend on a variety of factors, such as like funding, whether there's people working on it, or if your PI has the time to sort of manage the project and you at the same time. So a lot of stuff can culminate into the project that you will be working on, or projects. There's also the qualifier. Now the qualifier is going to depend by program heavily, because there are some programs, for instance, in my case, in physics, we don't have an official written qualifier. The qualifier is the final of each course. So if you pass all the courses and their finals, you pass the PhD qualifier. Compared to, like, say, the physics program at Princeton, you could take a maximum of 2 courses, but they have a written qualifier that you have to take, which I have seen and is quite nasty. So something to consider. And when looking for graduate programs, what is their qualifier like? Some of them are oral, some of them are presentation, some you submit a proposal or something. It depends. Next is your PI, a principal investigator, your advisor, your boss. This is very important that you select a PI carefully, because switching PIs halfway or later on in your PhD is not impossible, but it is quite hard to basically continue your PhD with such a major switch in the middle of your program. It's doable. It's just, you're just going to have a lot of difficulty if you've done so. So it's very important that you choose a good PI early on. And there's some programs that do rotations to sort of allow you the chance to like weigh your choices. So, And lastly, you're going to have to do some reading. There's some presentations, so you will be listening and giving presentations. You'll have seminars, colloquiums that you'll attend, conferences that you'll go to, and you'll be reading papers to write your own paper to publish and eventually your thesis. So with that said, now that we've got all of those refreshing points out of the way, I'll go ahead and start off with the introductions here. So our first panelist is Larissa. Please unmute yourself and introduce.
Hi guys, so my name is Larissa Size. I'm a third year student in the cell and molecular biology program at UH. I'm currently an RA. I did TA my first semester, and that was really difficult because they put me in genetics, and that's a very difficult class to teach, especially in your first year. So that was rough, but I've been an RA since that. So in my lab, we focus on transposable elements, which are genes that basically move throughout the genome and cause damage. So we're particularly interested in the mechanisms behind tolerating that damage, which means like the damage is still occurring, but the animals are able to kind of withstand the genetic damage that's going on. So I work with fruit flies, and my experience is a little bit different from most people in a couple of different ways. So the first way is that I am actually in the same lab as I was as an undergrad. So this is now, I'm going on my 5th year in the lab. So my thesis project isn't exactly what I was doing as an undergrad, but I'm still like in the same field as I was as an undergrad. And I actually applied to graduate school twice. And the most recent one was last cycle. So I have some very up-to-date information about applying to biology programs. So I'm happy to help you guys.
All right, thank you. Our next panelist, is she here? I don't see
Carolyn.
Carolyn.
No, I don't see her.
Okay, so we can come back to her once she logs on. So I guess that comes on to me. So I'm Alejandro Ramirez. I am in the physics department. My PI is Dr. Andrew Renshaw. So I'm an RA. I actually have the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship. So my PI doesn't pay for me. I basically got a fellowship that funds my research. And I'm a 4th year now. And so my lab is, the subdiscipline is known as experimental astroparticle physics. And what we basically do is study dark matter and try to build detectors to detect this matter in the universe. So our main experiment is known as DarkSide, which is in Gran Sasso, Italy. It's like an international collaboration with many different scientists and institutions coming together to build this very sensitive detector to try to once and for all determine whether or not dark matter is this sort of like hypothetical theoretical particle that we think exists. But aside from the hardware development that goes into this detector that our group does, I also take that technology and apply it to the medical field, specifically positron emission tomography imaging. So basically trying to pave the way for a new type of PET scanner that uses a cryogenic scintillation to image the human body for purposes of like oncology or just medical studies that require the precision of PET imaging. In terms of the experience like Larissa, I also went to undergrad here. I applied to graduate school and got into some schools in 2019, and I was set to go to Rice. However, after like considering, I thought there was like I figured there was opportunities to like advance myself here at UH compared to Rice, and the work at Rice would have been more computational, which is still interesting, but I do want to work on hardware and computation. So something to consider when like applying to graduate schools, it's the type of work you'll be doing and whether or not you'd be satisfied with it. Next up is Ariana. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Ariana Checo. I'm in the math department. I'm a fourth year PhD student. My advisors are Dr. David Bletcher and Dr. Mehrdad Kalanchar. Um, I have RA. So actually this is my first year having, or my first semester having RA. I had like half RA in the summer, yeah, but I was like teaching before then. Yeah, teaching is a lot. I'm really, really happy to have RA. So a little bit about what I do. Nothing I do is as interesting as what everyone else has said before me, and probably won't be as interesting as anyone after me. But what I do is I study like really pure math called, my research is in operator algebras. Which, as I said here, it grew partly out of the beginnings of like quantum mechanics, but I know no quantum mechanics, but that's just how it started. And what you can it's contained, what I do is contained in functional analysis, which you can think of as like infinite dimensional linear algebra. And in the study of operator algebras or operator theory, we just look at linear maps, linear functions, linear operators, and we see some things that happen with them. I kind of also do a little bit of dynamical systems with that. So I don't know how much I want to go like expand, I don't know, but my experience, so pretty similar to a few other people. I went to actually UH Clear Lake for my undergrad, and then I did 1 year at UH as like a post-bac because I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to grad school. And then now I'm here, so yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Next is engineering. Marcella, please introduce yourself.
Hi. So as Alice said, I'm Marcella. I'm in environmental engineering, and at UH, that's under civil environmental department. And I'm currently advised by Dr. Schaefer. I've done TA, and I also didn't have like the best experience, so I'm very happy to be doing RA now. But I'm going into my second year, and my main research is studying the fate and transport of microplastics after they leave wastewater treatment plants, and kind of how they end up in wetland systems across the Gulf. So I work a lot with Houston biosolids that have come from our own treatment plants and studying the microplastics in there. And then what are the mechanisms that actually move it? And some of what I want to like incorporate into it is more like outreach, policy and regulation, or environmental law, and then GIS as well, to kind of like scale it up and seeing what's going on at the watershed level or across the US. So my experience has been, I graduated from Arizona State in 2021, and I was already applying to grad school. So I started at UH that summer and then moved down in the fall. And I was co-advised at the time. I didn't have a project that's funded. This project is also not funded. So they really took a chance on me, and that's really why I picked UH. When I was applying, the other schools had funding, but they were for projects that I wasn't going to be interested in. So my undergrad, I mainly did a lot of nanotechnology and nanoparticle research, specifically in kind of like spacecrafts and NASA. And I decided that it was just not what I wanted to do anymore. I wanted to go more into like wetland ecology and the engineering processes of that. So I decided to change paths, and I'm really glad UH took that chance. And I did have that co-advised process, and so now I'm only under one advisor, so I'm barely starting my research. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Marcella. And we have here chemistry, actually a new member in our organization as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm mispronouncing this. Yunuen?
Oh, yeah, Yunuen. Yunuen is the
Yunuen?
correct pronunciation, but in English, usually people just say you know when, like a sentence. So
Oh,
that's cool with me, or
okay.
uni. But
Gotcha.
Marcella, I think you actually have a question for you before I start. I think.
Oh, okay. I was gonna answer in the chat, but
Oh,
Yeah,
it
there was
could
also a
take a sec.
post-back question too. So it depends if we want to do those now, if we want to wait till the introductions are
So
I
over.
can
let's
wait. I
wait
can wait.
until the introductions are over, then we can go into those questions. But
okay.
yeah.
All right, so hi everyone. My name is Yunuen Avila Martinez. I am in the chemistry PhD program. I'm a second year. I work with Professor Brad Caro. He actually just came down from Princeton to move over to U of H, so I feel really lucky in that regards. Right now I'm an RA, but my first year I was a TA. That's part of what is expected for all chemistry students in my department. At least the first year you have to teach for 2 semesters and you have to take courses, but now it's just research, so that's kind of fun. So my team works with polymers, specifically trying to make modified polymers that have some characteristics of one plastic and other characteristics of others, because generally whenever we recycle, first off, most of what we recycle just is more waste. It's not purified. But the way that recycling plants work is that they shred all the plastics and then just separate it by density. And the 2 most common plastics that we use is polyethylene and polypropylene. Those have very similar density, so they don't separate very well at all. And if we were to melt them and make new materials out of them, that material is brittle, and basically we haven't recycled it into anything that's useful anymore. So my project is about making new polymers that can kind of act as a glue and have some properties that are like polyethylene, some properties that are like polypropylene, to hopefully hold it together and actually make material that can be recyclable if we can't separate it whenever they're in the recycling plants. But yeah, I graduated from Texas A&M in 2020. Woo. And it was the start of the pandemic, so I went to work at Fujifilm. So I have industry experience. It was the pharmaceutical branch of Fujifilm, which that sounds weird because Fujifilm's known for their cameras, but because of the pandemic and because not everyone uses cameras anymore, we started making vaccines for COVID. And so if you guys ever get it from get any from a company called Novavax, that might have been manufactured over there. And then afterwards it was 2021, and I was like, or it was fall of 2020, my bad. I just thought I never wanted to do grad school. I didn't think I could do grad school, but I just gave it a shot because why not? And no one was taking GREs, so so I got in here, and I really like the professors, and I can talk more about it later. But yeah, that's me.
All right, thank you. And I think one more, and that is Jacob from biochemistry.
Hello, everybody. First off, apologies for being late. I know I ducked in here a little bit after the meeting started. Had some issues at pharmacy. I ended up getting the booster, and it took me a while to get the booster, even though my appointment was scheduled around 4:15. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm Jacob. I go by Jake typically for short. My PI is Dr. Yuhong Wang, and I am currently a TA. So my experience is a little abnormal, I think, compared to a lot of grad students. When I first came into the lab, I was actually RA'd for the first year, and my PI was planning on RAing me through my whole time in her lab. However, she lost a grant. It was a Welch Foundation grant. So I'm now unfortunately TAing, and it has been a lot more work. But I'm able to manage. So I'm a 3rd-year PhD student. So I've been TAing for the past 2 years, and officially a PhD candidate after this summer. I successfully proposed, so one milestone down. In terms of the research interests, so our lab group focuses on the ribosome. And for those of you who don't know or have not as much of a biology background, the ribosome is what translates mRNA into protein. All the proteins we use in life, basically, for biological life to function. My work, however, focuses on a specific protein called elongation factor G. Elongation factor G kind of like comes in during translation and interacts with the ribosome and helps the ribosome push or cause the mRNA to move through this like whole like complex as it's being translated. So basically my project is like focused on trying to understand critical residues, like amino acid residues of that process. And I am able to do that through a technique called single molecule fluorescence resonance energy transfer, shortened to single or SM-FRET. And basically that's just like looking at a screen that has fluorescent dyes like that are moving closer together and changing colors. It's a fluorescence technique. I won't go too far into detail because it takes some time. In terms of my background, so I did my undergrad at a smaller university in Florida called Florida Gulf Coast University. Graduated 2020 as well, peak of the COVID pandemic, so I can relate on that regard. No commencement ceremony. It was a unique experience, but it ended up coming to UH because there was a PI that I wanted to work for. His name was Dr. Fox, George Fox, not Robert Fox, for those who are familiar with the biology department, because I know if you are. Unfortunately, did not pan out. He was retiring, and I had come under the guise that I was going to be able to work with him on a side project. That unfortunately fell through, but I still like the work I'm doing, so it all worked out in the end.
Whoops. Thank you, Jake. So now we can start answering questions. I know that there has been some questions in the chat, so if it's all right, I can go ahead and start reading off some of the chat questions, if that's okay with everyone. So this one is for Ariana from Jennifer, and she asks, can you elaborate about your post-bac experiences? I've heard people mention that, but I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah, so actually it kind of is different from school to school. I know that some universities have like a whole like you could complete like a post-bac certificate and it's like a year-long thing. Some universities it's just like a status, like, and they just let you take classes. Also, depending on the university, sometimes they only let you take more undergrad classes, but some they also let you take graduate level classes. So here I was able to take, I was in some classes that were cross-listed as undergrad and grad. And so I just for a year took classes, got to meet some faculty in the department. I attended in the math department some seminars, the analysis group seminars. And yeah, I just took classes and then I applied here to go to grad school. So, but I think for most places it's you take a year, maybe. I don't think, I mean, I think you could do 2 years, but I think a lot of times it's just 1 year, and you take classes, graduate or undergrad. I was a full-time student, so or maybe I was like quarter time. Maybe it depends kind of, because some of the courses were considered grad and full-time for grad hours is 9. So I was taking 2 cross-listed, so like 6 grad hours and 1 undergrad, like 3 hours. So I like quarter time, I guess. And I also got to work as a grader for the math department at that time. So I was working for the math department and taking classes, and I was also a server at the time. So I was a server for like 5 or 6 years during my undergrad. So I did that a little bit too.
That's very interesting. Thank you. The next question that Jennifer has is for Marcella. Do you know anything about the geosciences program in the engineering department at UH?
Yeah, I have a friend in that program that I can also connect you with. She runs the STEMinist podcast, if any of y'all have seen it, for the UH engineering department. They also have a certificate, so I've been wanting to do that. It's just like 5 GIS classes, but it's a really cool program because it's also combined with Berkeley. The building is actually not on campus. It's going towards like Gulf Freeway by the train tracks. It's out in that direction. If you ever want me to like take you over there, their offices are really cool if you know where that is. But I can connect you with her. She's a scientist at a national park right now, so she won't be back. Well, she's coming back this month. But I think that's a really cool program because they collaborate a lot. Even some of the other professors within engineering are doing a lot of imagery and LiDAR with other universities in California because they just got grants this summer. So I highly recommend it. I'd be in that program if I wasn't in environmental. So she's the one that is encouraging me to do a certificate.
Yeah, that sounds really cool being a scientist at a national park. Must be very nice. But yeah, that's very interesting. So actually, the next question is also for Marcella from Abigail. For the graduate program, did you propose your own research? And if so, what was that process like? I thought we had to pick a project that already existed. Even though this is for Marcella, I do want to open this up to everyone here because I believe the process is different for different departments. So it would be interesting to see the different codes for each program. So, but Marcella, please go.
Yeah, and I would say it's also about the professor and stuff, so I can kind of dive into that. So when I was in undergrad, I started applying for the NSF GRFP. So that's where I started developing my own project. But to be honest, I started kind of late and I picked a project that was something that I wanted to do. And so, like I said, I was going in this new career path that I don't have a background in, specifically with ecology. So my project is even different than now. It was still microplastics, but it was more at the plants and wetlands. And so when I was applying to schools, they had already seen these proposals, but it wasn't what they were doing. They were wanting me for the background that I already had in nanotechnology and those instruments. And so I kind of had to make a decision, like, that's not what I want to do anymore. And so at UH, they said that they wanted to do microplastics and this was something they wanted to start. And so that's kind of where they took the chance. And the professor that I'm currently with is new to UH as well. I think he's only been there 3 or 4 years. So I think for him, he's just really enthusiastic about it, but they were very honest and transparent. Like, we don't have funding for this. So when I started UH, I applied again for the NSF GRFP and I didn't get it a second time. And so I did pick my own project and I've developed it a lot. It's just that they just decided to take a chance, and there's been some limitations, like we're barely getting materials now, but it has to be, the lowest cost and such. But they're just enthusiastic, and so it gives me hope. But I don't think that's always the case. I've had friends who maybe proposed something or wanted to do something different, but because they're on a funded project, you have to do what that project goals are, I guess.
I can kind of speak on it from biology. It's very similar. So I had done a rotation project because in the CMB program at UH, you have to do rotations, which is basically like testing out a lab and seeing if you like it and the professor likes you for I think it's 6 to 8 weeks or something like that in our subdivision. So, and everyone has to do at least 2. So I kind of did a pseudo rotation where I was doing a computational project with a potential collaborator of my PI's. And I really liked that project. And I kind of wanted to do that for my thesis work. But my PI kind of told me look, this is funded, this is not funded. So if you want to be an RA next semester, then, or if you want to be an RA throughout your PhD, then you're going to have to work on stuff that's funded by the grant that we have. If you don't, then you're going to have to TA pretty much for the rest of the time because we don't have money to do this computational project. But since you don't require reagents and stuff to do it, then if that's what you want, then you can do that. So I ended up picking the the funded project for mental health and financial reasons. And I'm actually like super glad that I did, because the computational project ended up falling through because the hypothesis that we had was completely off base. So that wouldn't have gone anywhere anyway. But yeah, like Marcella was saying too, if you apply for funding and stuff like that, and you're able to get funding, then you can pretty much pick whatever you want to do. But if you're going off of a grant that the PI already has, then you're going to have to work at least tangentially like related to whatever grant they have.
So maybe I can just share a little bit about math, because it's like completely different for us. So for example, one of my advisors, the one who gives me RA, there's no project that goes with his grant. So literally I could work, and he can work on absolutely anything he wants to work on, and any question he wants to work on, and any question he wants to give me, I can just work on. So this is, I think, very, very nice. Technically though, we all come in, all the math PhDs, we all are automatically TAs. We're all automatically funded, no matter, none of us have to come in with a project in mind at all, because in a math PhD, you have to still take 2 years worth of classes before you can start doing research, usually, unless you have a master's beforehand. So there's that. Everyone is automatically funded to be a TA, which I mean is a lot of work. And you're just really lucky if you want to work with a professor who has a grant and has money and can fund you. But yeah, so at least in math, yeah, we don't have to pick any projects. And when your advisor is funded, typically, like at least in my experience, like in pure math, like any NSF grants that my advisor has, or there's like another one called like a Simon Fellowship, and these are like very like they don't care what they do, like they have to write a proposal to get it right, but they don't have to follow like that project that they put in the proposal. Like they can just do whatever. So it's been very nice, because I originally started kind of looking into one thing, but I just didn't like super love it. And so now it's very easy for me to just like do like a different project. Like I finished that one, I didn't love it, I don't have to like do any more on it, so I can just go to another problem now. So yeah.
That's so nice. I wish that was the case for us as well.
Yeah, we're that kind of sucks that you had to choose the project like based on funding or not. That's really interesting to hear that in other disciplines you have to do that, because
yeah,
I don't know, I never heard that before.
It's funny too, because like if you ask like my other lab members what their research is, we're basically working on like different facets of the same thing. So all of our research is like extremely related. So, and we're all working off of that same grant. So that's why
Wow.
it's all related.
Yeah. Oh, another thing, you said you had to do rotations in math. So typically, we don't have to do anything like that either. There's like no rules about we have to do 2 rotations. So after a year to 2 years, we can start taking what are called like reading courses. And that's just where you take 3 hours with a professor, and they give you papers and you read and you try to work together to see if you like fit together. But like, for example, I already knew who I wanted to work with. He was my professor multiple times, Mehrdad Kalantar. And I already knew that I wanted to work with him and he wanted to work with me. And then just so happened there was like a project he was working on with my now co-advisor, David Bletcher. And he was like, do you want to work on this? And I was like, yeah. So like, we don't, and you don't even technically have to do reading courses. Like if you just know you want to work with someone, you can just like start working with them. So there's no like rules about having to experiment with different people or anything like that either in that.
I think it's like a blessing and a curse to do rotations, because I think if you're really unsure about like what you want to do or what direction you want to go when you come into grad school, like that's one like awesome thing about programs that have rotations, is that you don't even like need to know who you want to work with, and let alone like what project you want to do going in. So you get to kind of like shop around, I guess. But then a drawback of that is usually we don't really get started on our thesis work until our second year. But I know Carolyn isn't here, I don't think, but ecology. So biology has 3 subdivisions at UH. It's cell molecular biology, biochemistry, and ecology and evolution. And ecology and evolution students have the option to do a rotation, but it's not required. It just varies by department, I guess.
Yeah, the rotations can definitely be a blessing and a curse, because I know whenever I came here, I was like 90% sure I was going to work with my current PI, just because I had been in contact with her. I'd also been in contact with that other PI that was working alongside of her. But then the program was like, well, you have to do 2 rotations. And I'm just like, oh boy, I don't know who else I really would want to work with. So I really struggled like finding like a second person that I wanted to work with. So I think that's like, it can be good if you don't really know, I guess, like you can kind of like test the waters, but if you do know, it kind of does suck.
I kind of pulled a sneaky on him.
You did, yes. You broke the law.
I'm kind of surprised that other departments do rotations. I know other schools do that, but at least here at U of H for chemistry, there's no rotations. You don't go in knowing who you're working for, though. They ask you to interview with at least 3 professors. And then about picking a project, like, do you pick it or does your PI? Your PIs have different projects going on, and then they'll try to like, I guess, convince you about joining their group for their project. And then once you start, you'll start off first off by just following their ideas. And I think eventually, yeah, you can come up with your own ideas, but it's not really expected. It's more of just like, you're going to get ideas from your PI, and then you have to go make it work or make it fail, and then let them know. And yeah, that's how the chemistry department works.
I have a question.
Yes, Steve.
Yes, Steve-O.
This one's for Larissa. So I've asked around a lot of these CMB graduate students, and a lot of them, like a very large majority of them, tell me not to come to UH. But my past PI, Dr. Fang, told me that UH is actually like a pretty good place, because like the average person graduates from here in like 5 years versus like other places. And like, based on my experience at UH, we have pretty good like and modern equipment. So that's good. But everybody here tells me, don't go to UH. No money or like bad administration, stuff like that. So someone who has had the opportunity to go to different schools, why did you decide to stay here?
Yeah, so for reference, Stephen was actually one of my students when I was teaching genetics. So like I said, I reapplied last year, and I got into University of California, Irvine, University of Texas, San Antonio, University of Georgia, and some other school that I can't remember off the top of my head right now. So I had the option to leave and go somewhere else, but I ultimately decided to stay here. I think one big issue that I have with other students in the biology department is that most of the students like seclude themselves. They don't like talk with other students or like try to have like a camaraderie with everyone, and it's kind of irritating sometimes, because like I'll be like, oh, let's work together, or oh, let's like talk, or oh, let's hang out, and like they're really not into it. So I'm part of why I'm working so hard with SACNAS is I want to create that feeling of camaraderie so it doesn't feel like, oh, it just sucks. As far as the money, it really varies from lab to lab. So like my lab is extremely well funded. Jake's lab is extremely well funded for the most part. Alejandro's lab is also well funded. Oh well, he's in physics. Who else do we know? Rich's lab is pretty well funded as well.
I think Rasha's group is pretty funded.
Yeah, so I know, and then like Jacob did a rotation with Dr. Widger.
Oh,
And
man.
he is not well funded, but the reason that he's
No.
not well funded is because he doesn't apply for grants.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
you want to go to a PI that like is consistently like applying for money to support their students. Another thing is that I noticed that the cancer labs at UH are extremely competitive, and it's an extremely like fast pace and high pressure environment. But you worked in Dr. Feng's lab already, so you already kind of know how that is. I know Roshni's in Dr. Peng's lab, and they're doing like similar stuff, and you've talked to Amrita as well. She's your mentor. So I think it's really, I always tell people like your graduate experience is going to be, or any experience is going to be what you make of it. So like if you go in like, oh, this sucks, like you're going to have a sucky time. But if you go in like, I'm going to make this work, or I'm going to, you know, do my best, and I'm going to apply for funding if my PI isn't applying for funding, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to take, you know, matters into my own hands, then I feel like you're going to have a lot better time. And if you're communicating, you know, with your fellow grad students and actually, you know, trying to network and build like strong relationships with other people in your department, then that's like extremely important as well. Because, you know, I know everyone in the bio department. I know all the faculty, and I know like most of the students. So that's part of the reason why I stayed, because it's a very collaborative environment. I feel, you know, I have extra committee members because I just really wanted to have like mentors on my committee that were gonna support me as like, not just like a professor, but as a person as well. Like these are people that genuinely like care about me as a person and as a researcher. So I think it's just like really you have to make an effort to make these connections, I think. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thanks, Lulu.
You're welcome.
Okay, Jennifer had actually posted a question in the chat, I guess to everyone. Does anyone have experience doing a certificate? Jennifer, by certificate, do you mean like for programming or like some other skill that would have certificates, like technical ones, maybe? I guess it's quite a broad question, but okay. So a GIS certificate the Earth and Atmospheric Sciences Department offers at UH. So any certificates that anyone has here?
I think
I
Marcella
have,
said she did.
Yeah, I currently don't have the GIS. Well, I haven't completed it to get that. But at ASU, I got certificates from the state of Arizona for like water quality, because I knew going into grad school, I don't have industry. So then I asked the professional development offices and student gov to pay for my OSHA HAZWOPER training, so that when I do apply for jobs, I already have those hours under my belt and they don't have to train me, because that's money that they would spend. So if there are any industry ones, I would recommend like taking that, so that they know that, you know, you said this already and you did it, and so they won't have to pay extra to train you, and you're more hireable that way. It just depends. I think with environmental, there's just a lot to do for the state, so that's kind of why I do it now, because I don't have any industry experience.
That's interesting. Anyone else have any certificates?
I don't think not like how she's talking about.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, we have another question from Abigail. It says, are you restricted by your undergraduate degree for what you could do for a graduate degree in? For instance, since my major is biomedical engineering, but could I do something more chemistry based if I wanted to, or maybe branch out into other engineering departments?
Okay.
Can I
Oh.
kind of,
Yeah. Go.
well, I want to give some examples because this is our second year doing the mentorship program. So there's one person in our cohort that actually got her undergrad degree in microbiology, and she's getting her graduate degree in biochemistry. And last year, we had a student in the mentorship program who had a double major in math and physics and went into a computational biosciences program. So the only thing I would say is that if you're like really switching fields up like that, like you need to be ready and willing to put in the work to kind of resolve the gaps in your knowledge in that field, because I know this student that is now in a computational biosciences program is having a hard struggle with his intro courses because he didn't study biology before he came into that program. So if you're planning on switching fields like that, then definitely you need to put in the work to kind of keep yourself up to speed. Anyone else?
I remember hearing someone say that it was a lot easier to teach a biologist how to code than to teach someone who knows how to code all of biology.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's true because I picked up coding pretty quickly.
At least like in math, like so I kind of agree a little bit with what Larissa said. Like we had someone who came in with just an engineering undergrad degree and then is doing their PhD, and engineering is not nearly as math heavy as say like so there's people who have like undergrad and master's degree in physics who then come and do math, and they are a lot stronger in their math background. So it really just kind of depends. So again, if you're changing something like kind of far, like going kind of far across disciplines to change, yeah, I mean, it might be a lot of work, but you might be able to. But,
Yeah, I would also say specifically for engineering, there are some departments and professors that might say no, because then that would mean you would have to take a lot of undergrad courses. So for example, in environmental, we do take in more chemical engineers and civil structural, but they do have to take a lot of undergrad courses their first year to make up for that gap. And so that can be a struggle versus going from like biomedical to, if you want to do like civil structural, that would be a very far gap to make up some of those undergrad classes. But I think for biomed to chemistry might be doable, but it's something to look into before applying. Like look at their website, look at requirements, because normally they say that like which courses you would have to take to make up, and then up to the professor too.
Yeah, I feel like you'd need to brush up or learn some chemistry if you're gonna do that. Did you wanna?
Basically everything that you were saying I was going to say. So yeah, you can definitely come from a different background. Some of my friends were biochem majors and then they went into chemistry. But just like Larissa said, you need to come prepared to work really hard because there's a lot to catch up on. It's not impossible though, it can happen.
I just want to add something on that. So I'm actually in the same position as you are regarding my undergraduate degree was in bio, and I am now applying to graduate schools. And I'm kind of doing a pretty big switch from what I did in my undergrad, but from based on the people that I've talked to, they've been very supportive of me um, doing that. And I think so that, like, for example, that's why I was considering doing that certificate, because I was like, well, I didn't receive a formal training in that field. So I'm like kind of hesitant to make that change. But maybe like if I do that certificate, I'll feel more comfortable or feel more confident doing that. So maybe that could be an option for you too, if you found something you wanted to do.
All right. Very good answers from everyone. We have a question from Anne, who asks, how soon should we email potential PIs? So I will say sort of briefly, as soon as you start applying. When you make the decision that you are going to start applying, that's when you should just email them.
Can I just say one thing? I'm like the only like odd one out, like math. I mean math. You do not have to email anyone ever. Like you don't have to ask anyone. You don't have to do anything like that. So just saying, just a little bit different from everyone else. We don't have to email anyone ahead of time at all. And in fact, people will think you're too I don't know, like people think it's kind of weird, like you should
Aggressive.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, like not even kidding. Someone was emailing my advisor like before they were coming here, like, can I work with you? Can I work with you? And he's like, can you just email them and talk to them and tell them they don't need to do that? Yeah. So I talked to them. But yeah, so in math, we don't do this. This is like really weird and strange. So I just wanted to say, sorry, everyone else can go ahead.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Would you say that's just at UH though? Because I'm not sure if I've heard that like at ASU or other schools for the math department.
Actually, so I know quite a few math people at ASU. I'm speaking there in November, and yeah, I mean, this is pretty, yes, thank you. It's, I would say, yeah, like if you know someone and you want to work someone like in your master's program, like your advisor is telling you go work with this advisor, like something like this, but just in general, because in math, you have 2 years of classes in almost any department that you go to. You have 2 years of classes that you have to take before you can start doing research. So you don't start doing research till your 3rd year in math. So yeah, this is really odd. Like, I'm not saying that not, again, if it's like you can and people do, but like once you're past the point of like getting into grad school, you learn that that's weird, and so you try to tell other people not to do that anymore. It's a completely different culture, and you can, and some like so this is really common in Europe. Like in Europe, you cannot go to a PhD program in Europe without already having a PhD advisor picked out. But this is not true in the US. So yeah.
Mm.
Oh, go ahead. I went first last.
So one thing I want to say is that I kind of think it has to do with how competitive of an applicant you are. So if you are a very competitive applicant, go ahead, send your emails. If it's likely that you're going to get into those schools, talk to those PIs so that way they can keep an eye out for you. However, whenever I applied to grad school, I had a huge learning curve to get over as an undergrad, so I wasn't a very competitive applicant. And so basically reaching out to PIs beforehand didn't really do me any good. But once I was accepted to schools, then it was like, all right, you are in, go email anyone that you are interested in. And then at that point, since all the PIs know that you've already been accepted, all the PIs are going to be more interested in hearing about, okay, who's this girl or who's this guy? So maybe judge yourself to see if you would view yourself as a competitive applicant, or one that's like, okay, they're not going to care about me until I'm in. And then after that, I mean, everyone wants members in the research team, so they're going to be looking for you. And if you're already in the school, then they're going to be like, okay, there's a good chance of pulling them in. But that's my spiel.
I kind of want to jump in here too, because that's interesting, Uni, because I had a similar experience in undergrad, right? I don't think I was a very competitive candidate at the time. My undergrad GPA wasn't great, it was okay. That said, I applied to 8 schools. I only got into the one that I actually emailed and formed a relationship with the professor beforehand. So that I think it's very dependent, you know what I mean? So that's interesting though.
Yeah, no, in that case, I mean, maybe ignore me.
No, I don't think I think it's just very it's probably just very dependent on like the department, the faculty themselves, but that's super interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Whoa. Well, I'm glad you got in.
Me too, because I kept getting rejection letters.
Oh my God. Okay, so I have 2 experiences with this. As far as like a timeline, since you're applying in like December, I would start doing it like right now. So the first time I did it, I was kind of all over the place. I did form a relationship with like a really strong relationship, I think, with one of the universities that I applied to, and I applied to 10. I think that was 2019. And it actually, like, I got rejected from that one as well. So it's not always like a sure shot, like, okay, I have someone on the inside. And that guy was like on the application committee too, and it still didn't help me. So it really, really depends on the school and how much of an asshole they are. But this past year that I applied in 2021, right? I was extremely methodical about who I contacted and when I contacted them and what I said. And I started at the beginning of September. So I basically had like this copy pasta email that had like, oh, this is what, this is who I am, this is my research and everything. And I had people look it over and make sure that it was comprehensible and professional. And then I basically just changed the name. Dear Dr. whoever, and then like sent that to like everyone. And I ended up making relationships with like 4 of the professors, I think, and I got into every school that I did that with this year, except Baylor College of Medicine. I don't even care anymore. I'm putting them on blast. They rejected me twice, and they were the one that rejected me before as well. So they're on blast. My dirty laundry's out there, and I don't care anymore. But yeah, it really depends on the school. And I think like the first time I applied to a lot of like Ivy League tier, and I was not as competitive an applicant as I was last year. I was extremely competitive last year, and I actually got like early acceptances. So UGA emailed me like 2 days after my interviews and was like, oh, you're definitely in, and everyone else has to wait like 2 weeks to get their answer. So yeah, I would definitely start right away. And if you have like a draft of your email and you work in our lab, so if you want me to look over like the research part of it, then I'm happy to. And then Shinjini can look over the rest for you. But yeah, I would definitely start sending those ASAP.
One thing I want to add real quick, whenever you send an email to a professor, make sure somewhere in there you talk about their research, because it's like candy to them. They're just like, oh, so someone else sees the purpose of what I'm doing with my life. And so they're more likely to pay attention to you then.
Yeah, okay, so I want to like edit a statement that I made earlier. It was copy pasta except the last paragraph, which is like, I read your paper on blank, and I really think my experience with blank would make me a good candidate to be in your lab. So try to like tie the research that we're doing in the lab to whatever they're doing, like, oh, I learned techniques and stuff that will be valuable to your lab. So you should totally like pay attention to me.
All right. Any more questions from the audience? If not, we could end it here, or I could ask a more general based question for everyone here, if everyone's willing to stick it out for one more question. Yeah. Okay. So I think one relevant question for anyone looking to pursue an undergraduate degree, not a graduate degree, coming from an undergraduate one, is sort of what was the transition like going from your undergraduate or post-bac from your graduate degree? How did you handle it? What was a defining experience in that process? Like, what was your first semester like? Was it rocky? Did you get into the groove of it? Because I know for sure my first semester was very rocky, and that's putting it very mildly. So I'm very interested to hear what everyone else's experiences has been like.
I think Larissa and I can both relate that our first semesters were right peak COVID. So that was pretty goddamn rocky.
Well, to be fair, I feel like in the grand scheme of things, my transition to grad school, as far as like classes went, was very seamless. I didn't have like a super great GPA in undergrad, but I have almost a 4.0 grad GPA. So one of the people that were interviewing me last year actually commented on that, like, wow, you're doing really good compared to your undergrad. So as far as classes go, it was pretty seamless for me, but it's definitely different for everyone, because I know like Alejandro had a lot of trouble with his classes his first year. So as far as like work and stuff goes, like Jake said, like we started grad school in the fall of 2020, so that was literally like peak like COVID hours. So I didn't get much research done that semester for two reasons. I think the biggest learning curve for me was teaching and like doing classes and research at the same time. It was definitely not something that I want to do again. But the other thing is, my PI kind of had to sit me down and like have a talk, and it's like, okay, look, like you are full-time now. Like if you're an RA, like you need to be here like 8 hours a day. It's a full-time job. So that was kind of the biggest thing for me, like having to put myself on a 9 to 5 or 10 to 6 or whatever the hell I'm doing right now, but getting enough, hours to do my research and move things forward was the biggest transition for me.
I think my starting time here was very weird. It was right after the pandemic, so 2021. And I was just like, okay, new school, let's get a new personality and just ask a bunch of questions. I used to be very afraid of asking questions as an undergrad, and I was like, well, do it now, because like, why not? And that helps so much. Just ask so much questions. No one's gonna think you're dumb. No one cares, and in fact, people are probably gonna be really helpful that you asked. And so that helped me out so much. I did not have, it was busy. It was very busy the first year, but I didn't have that much trouble getting or starting my PhD. It wasn't until I started research during the summer after classes that like I had some personal stuff happen, and it was like a blow to like self-esteem and everything. Still adapting from that, but that happens in the PhDs, like life happens, and getting through that can be very hard. And also just like the fact that your research, it's bound to fail. And that's okay. Understand it's going to fail. And just know that, like, even if you're okay with that, things are going to happen in life that also are going to weigh you down. I'm sorry. But yeah.
It's a hard truth.
Yeah, I can also
Yeah.
jump
So for
in.
me-
Oh,
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
No,
guys.
you can go ahead. Oh, you can go. You can
Okay.
go.
Okay. So I just kind of wanted to kind of jump in with I think a unique experience. I don't know if anyone else kind of moved the distance that I did. So I moved from like South Florida to kind of like Houston, first time like living away from home. I think that was the hardest part. That was a very jarring experience, especially if you're someone who's never lived away from home. Now, if that isn't the case, you know, obviously that might be different, but I would say it's something to keep in mind if you're looking at schools like, I don't know, let's say University of Washington or University of Pitt, you know, UPitt, like, you know, all these like other states. It might not seem to be that big of a deal. Like you're only a couple, maybe like, oh, 6 hour flight, you know, or so, 5 hour flight, but that distance is hard. And that was a very big um acclimation. I think like once you kind of meet people and get through the feeling of homesickness and that feeling of like I should just leave, I should just give this up, because I know there were people even in our cohort or my cohort that gave into that and ended up leaving the program because they just couldn't, you know, deal with being away from home. So I think that that was probably the biggest like transition for me personally.
I kind of had not like a homesick experience, but I was going to drop out of my program in May, especially not having the NSF GRFP. My first semester was really rough as far as like classes, TAing, and then also pressure from like writing this proposal because I don't have funding. And so I also, my advisor was not a good fit for me. So I had to also go through that process of switching advisors. So it got to the point where I was like, I'm gonna leave, but the professors here are really collaborative and really nice and supportive. And so I stayed and I'm much, much happier. But I think, yeah, getting involved with SACNAS was a big part of that too. Going to UH CAPS and just kind of dealing with that too really helped make the classes and just situation much, much better. But it was a hard start at first.
Yes, so I agree. Like, even though I did like some cross-listed classes in my year of post-bac, so they were like cross-listed for undergrad and like grad, I guess I just took like a really hard batch of classes together my first year of grad school. And on top of like teaching and stuff, like I would stay at the school till like 10 or 11 p.m. sometimes at night, like getting there at 8 a.m. and just working. I would come up on the weekends and I like cried every day. And at the time I would like go to he's now my PhD advisor, but at the time he was just my professor. And he would just be like, he would just like sympathize, I guess. He was always really there for me. He was like a really good person to go to. And he really helped, but it was still really hard despite that. Everyone here seems to have had a similar experience with TAing. It is a lot of work. And with not a lot of reward, like, I don't know. And even as like, okay, so I mean, not everyone will have this experience, but like I just had like this horrible kid who like I ended up having to report for like making racist comments to another student in my lab and like doing all kinds of horrible things. So literally my first semester, and he called me the B word in lab. Like he was a horrible, so that was like a horrible experience, like my first semester of grad school. And then the second semester we went online for COVID. So I mean, I didn't have to start grad school in COVID. I think I would probably have quit if I had to start grad school during COVID. Y'all are really, really impressive for doing that because I don't think I could have. But yeah, so my first year was hard. The years have gotten better though, especially now not having the TA. Yeah. Screw that guy. They kicked him out of the calculus class, so I was really glad
Good.
about that. Yeah.
I should have been kicked out of the university,
Yeah.
to be honest. Dude, he sounds like an asshole. Jesus.
Oh, he was, and he like took pictures of her and was like sending it in a group chat that like he didn't know that her friend was in. Oh my God. Yeah, it was really bad. So yeah, I loved being a TA, not really. Which is sad because I actually like teaching. I want to teach, but yeah, just that experience, my first semester, like really, I don't know, kind of affected how I felt about it.
Amen to that.
If no one else is going, I guess I can go last. I went directly from undergrad to graduate school, no break, just a summer one. And even then I was partially working during the summer. And I knew for sure that I wanted to come and live closer to the university because I lived with my parents during my undergrad, and my parents live out by Katy. So during undergrad, I would have to make a commute every day back and forth, and it was just such a huge waste of time. So I knew for sure, like graduate school is like, no, we cannot do the same dance again. I am finding a place. But the thing is, I was coasting off the money that I had earned from an internship, so that's not going to be enough to get me something. And I had to get employment from my professor, who was like agreed, and then like the department being the great department that it is in my program, very slow to pay me. So every credit card that I have is not because I wanted a credit card, it's because I needed a credit card. This was desperation. At one point in my banking account, I had like $7 and I was like approved for a credit card. And I used that to basically buy my furniture, food, and stuff for my apartment as I was moving in because the department was very slow to pay me. And eventually they did, and I was able to just sort of pay things off, and my parents helped me move in, and I found a roommate who would help me get to campus because I didn't have a car either. So I had to save up for that. So starting up graduate school, I was also involved in SACNAS as well, and I thought, okay, I can balance the two. I should be able to. I was very wrong because grad school classes, at least in physics, are just are like so tough. Oh my God. Especially when your professor gets called off from his vacation in Vienna to cut and gets told, oh, you have to teach these new first years the classical mechanics, and he comes in all angry and grumpy and does not want to be there. And he gives us this horrible book that he's written that no one can understand. And it's like has a lot of typos and for some reason ranting about the Catholic Church or something. And then he gets angry when we try to explain to him that the question had a typo and that we're just doing it wrong and that we're just not smart enough. And or another professor who is simping for his old PI that he used to work under because he had a Nobel Prize or something. It's very interesting, some of these characters that teach you in physics, but just culminating a lot of things and some of the professors that keep you late after class. We had a professor, he's really sweet, he tells jokes, he's old, he probably makes the most money in the program because he gets a lot of oil money because he works with like seismic physics. But sometimes he would keep us on a Tuesday until like 10 o'clock at night because he would run his classes very long, and it's just like something, once he got started he couldn't stop, and you would try your best to pay attention. But it was an easy class, but still nonetheless stressful. And at the end of all this, on top of teaching all of this, I was told that I had failed 2 of the 3 classes I was taking. And so I tried to like appeal one of my grades with one of my professors saying, hey, I was just like so close. And even like a student who got past the threshold that this guy had set, he still failed that student. So it didn't make sense that what this guy's reasoning. I was trying to understand it, and And to preface the sort of insult he said to me and my lab mate, there's basically two major fields in like physics. There's like you have the theorists and you have the experimentalists. And so this guy was a theorist and he knew I was working under experimental work, and he sort of attributed what I was doing right now in my lab as nothing more than technical work, nothing based in physics, and that I was a technician along with my lab mate who was working with me. So he basically called me and my lab mate technicians. So I was like holding back my tongue, like, okay, I see who you are. Okay. So that was a fun experience. And the other professor, he realized that I had taken his undergraduate course, the same class. So we have classical mechanics undergrad, and we have graduate classical mechanics, and both times it was the same professor, that same terrible professor. And he noticed, like, you did do so well in my class, care to explain why? And I wanted to tell him, but like, you know what, let's be nice,
Dang, all of our dirty laundry is just out here right now.
but it was something like it humbled me in the sense that that my time management skills that I had gained in undergrad was not sufficient for the stuff that I was dealing, from moving out to living on my own, not having certain resources down, professors that just were unruly, or classes that turned out to be a lot harder than I anticipated, and my time being focused on elsewhere. It really got me thinking, like, okay, I gotta like reevaluate myself right here, otherwise it's gonna keep going. And COVID actually saved my ass during the second semester, because like professors had to post their notes online, and our professors would never do that in class. So having that option was super helpful in like learning the material. So in a way, COVID helped me pass those like really difficult courses. But yeah, that's my rocky road.
Delicious.
Oh, it was not delicious at the time.
Oh my God.
Did
I
you
feel
report that professor? I'm so sorry.
I mean, I've heard a lot of tea on this professor, especially how he is with certain female physicists in the department. It's really bizarre. I don't. But the thing is, at night when I'm in bed and I'm telling myself that I'm not a technician, I'm a physicist, I remind myself that he's just a theorist. He barely gets money. Experimentalists get all the money. So I'm sitting pretty.
Hey.
I'm sitting pretty with my money. He can call me whatever he wants. I don't care. I can't hear you over all my funding.
Yeah.
The other professor, though, were you accidentally in the undergrad class and you were supposed to be in the grad one? And so.
So
You took him.
no, so I took him for undergrad and I took him again for graduate. The same professor taught the same flavor of course, if in a manner of speaking. And so like it was just jarring, because like even during undergrad, he didn't teach us about Hamiltonians, which was very crucial for the physics GRE. And I had to learn that for the first time before taking my physics GRE, because he didn't cover it. So I didn't like this professor already. But yeah, everyone knew that this guy was terrible, and you basically have to carry your own.
Jennifer asked, how do grad classes differ from undergrad? I don't know about like other departments, but I think one major difference, sorry, my dogs are playing with toys. One huge difference that I experienced is that undergrad classes are a lot more like, oh, you need to like know this material, memorize this pathway, know how this works, stuff like that. And then you just regurgitate information. For grad classes, the vast majority of the classes that I've had, aside from statistics, I think, has been like you have to think about things, and they're like, okay, if you had this experiment, like how would you design this experiment? Like, oh, write me a grant, like this portion of a grant, or let's just sit here and discuss, new techniques and methodologies and stuff like that. And that's how you're graded. And you don't take tests, and you don't do all of this stuff. It's very like, it's more to get you to think like a scientist rather than regurgitate information, if that makes any sense. But that's
Y'all are taught to write grants?
Sort of. Like we have like 4 core classes that we need to take, and they're like mini courses, like half a semester. So we had like 2 writing assignments, and one of them was like, okay, I need you to write, like they gave us a prompt, like, okay, this is like what you want your grant to be over, and you need to write that. So that was kind of difficult for me, because like I'm a geneticist, like straight up. I only work with genetics, but the prompt that I was given was like heavy cancer bio, and I had no idea of any techniques like with cancer bio. And it's not so much about you need to know like these techniques and stuff like that. It's, if you're given a problem, can you look at the literature that's already published and design an experiment that can solve this problem? So that like, yes, Jennifer, you're saying it sounds better. Yes, that's why I thrived more, was because I was like being able to actually think about things. And like the second grant, quote unquote grant, that we had to write was like more free, like you could write it about whatever you want. So I wrote it about stuff that had to do with my research, and it actually helped me a lot, like to get my understanding of my rotation project at that time. So I think it's really good. The fact that they sometimes give you freedom and sometimes don't give you freedom and make you think through a problem that you wouldn't have been thinking through otherwise. It is super challenging, but I would say it's more rewarding, and the professors are more like, there's not a right or wrong answer, right? So they can't be like, oh no, this is wrong, unless like, I guess one thing that I did with that cancer bio grant thing was like, I wrote a technique that wasn't really suited for what I was wanting to do. And she just said like, hey, yeah, I know you're not super familiar with cancer bio, but like, this isn't like the proper technique that you would use, or the proper method that you would use. So like, you're never going to be told like, that's wrong. It's more like, there's a better way to do this, and you need to find the better way.
At least in math, so for our first 2 years, you have to take classes, like at least 3 classes a semester your first year, and 2 to 3 a semester your second year. And sometimes the classes are project based, but most of the time you're still just like doing homeworks. Maybe there's like, instead of having like 10 homeworks a semester, you have like 5, but they're still like very hard, intensive homeworks. One thing that was different from undergrad is we did a lot of like presentations. So like you would come to the board and explain a theorem and stuff like this, and we would type up notes and stuff like that. But I would say, at least in math, if you're someone who hasn't had a master's before, so if you're going straight from undergrad into grad school, you're gonna have to take a lot of classes and just keep doing a lot of homework. It's just gonna be like undergrad, but like a lot more intense, a lot heavier, and more projects, I guess. But
So I think I enjoyed my grad courses a lot more than my undergrad courses, because they are so specialized in the field. And so it's things that I'm actually interested in learning. They are intense, they are hard, but your classes are a lot smaller, and you actually get to know your professor. So you're not taking classes with 300 other strangers, which can feel lonely, even though there's more people. So it's like 10 times more work at least, but it's also, I think in a way a little funner because you get to make a community with your classmates, get to know your professors, and it's over subjects that you're actually caring.
Jake.
Yes. In terms of classes.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Classes. So biochem, I will say like the classes aren't great. There's a one specific course. For the most part, like the courses were structured, I would say similar to what Larissa mentioned. Up and like I know membranes, like we had to take a membranes course where you were given like this problem, you had to solve this problem, right? It was taught by Dr. Fujita was his name. I think that our classes aren't structured as well. There are some issues with the faculty, very similar to what Alejandro has mentioning. There was one class that I took last semester that was basically we were just given arbitrary grades, 2 tests, and that was it. And they were all multiple choice tests. And we found out that the quiz banks were all just online. And he was just taking answers from Quizlets. And made sense why the material we covered in the class didn't seem to make sense because like the material we're tested on is literally not anything we're covered in class. So I don't know. I have not had a good experience, I think, with classes overall. It's in terms of like in the grad program. I think there's a lot left to be desired. That's kind of why I wasn't commenting because it's like it's just been a mess. Like some classes are okay, other classes are terrible. I'm taking like a class at Rice right now, which is actually pretty interesting. It's like a molecular biophysics course, but then that's like really weirdly structured because it's a mixture of undergrads, grads from Baylor and Rice. So yeah.
I think like what you kind of said is true. Like classes are weirdly structured, at least
Yeah.
for biology as well, because like it's really kind of unclear on how you're being graded.
Yeah.
So you don't really know like how you're doing unless you like ask the professor like, hey, how am I doing in the course? But the only class that I've taken so far that I didn't get an A in was biostatistics, and I got an A- on that one. And it was a lot of coding, and I had little to no prior experience in R, so I was kind of struggling my way through that class. But I did learn a lot, and I think that was worth the minus 0.01 on my GPA or whatever that was.
That's kind of, I think, the frustrating part with like biochemistry's classes. Other than, I would say, biostatistics and the course I'm taking at Rice right now, I really don't feel like I've learned anything new. You know, it just feels like it's a regurgitation of material that we've already covered in like general biochemistry, but the structures are so messy that it's just so confusing, right? I know like that proteins class, which I took, you know, I ended up getting like a C in it because, and so did another student, and there was a whole other can of worms there. So like, it's just, I don't know, it's frustrating. You know, I feel like these classes could be, whenever I imagined graduate classes, this is not what I imagined. So.
I will say for physics, the core classes have this mentality of like, you should know this material. We are just reviewing it and we're adding some extra stuff. But as you
Yeah.
get further into the advanced electives, that's where it starts becoming more relaxed and more
Yep.
discussion based. For instance, we had this special topics course called Matter Under Extreme Conditions, where you looked at what happens if you say increase the pressure but decrease the temperature, or increase pressure and increase temperature. What kind of phases of matter you have, their transitions, and the professor would say, I straight up don't know some of this stuff. So if you ask me a question, there could be a possibility that I just don't know. So that's when you know you're at literally the precipice of scientific knowledge. That's those advanced electives. So again, it depends on the program, but some of the core classes, like there might be a repeat of like an undergraduate version. So if that's the case, it might be a review course to sort of get you familiar or get some of the students who didn't have the opportunity to take that class to learn. But the more advanced I've seen, the more advanced the course gets, the more discussion based it gets.
And that's, I think, where the problem arises in biochemistry, at least, right? So that's it, similar structure. I think it's how they're trying to structure it. It's supposed to be those four core classes are supposed to almost be like refreshers or reviews, and then maybe with like a little bit of advanced materials. The problem is, I think it comes like with biochem, like there are like no biochem electives. There's no advanced biochem electives really. Like I'm having to take all my electives, like for example, I'm taking an elective at Rice and I'm taking an elective in the physics department next semester with Morrison. So I guess like if it felt like, it feels like if there was more discussion, I would enjoy it. You know what I mean? But I digress.
Mhm. All right, if no one else has anything to add, I think we can end it here. So if you do have any additional questions, you can email us here, got some handles, or if you want to get in contact with one of the panelists, let us know. We'd be happy to get y'all in touch. But thanks again. I want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time out of their day to come in and share their experiences. I definitely learned some things from different programs here that are very interesting, and have changed my perspective on how I will teach some of these workshops in the future based on discipline. So huge thanks to those who came and attended, and the recording should be available soon. I just got to process it. But other than that, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Nice to meet you
Thank
guys.
you. Yes. Nice to meet you all.